The first thing people noticed was the silence. Not the respectful silence of mourning, but the strange, uneasy kind that hangs in the air when something feels wrong, though no one can quite say why. The kind that presses against your chest and makes you hold your breath without realizing it. Black cars lined the cemetery road like a parade of polished grief. Expensive shoes sank into soft earth. Umbrellas hovered though the sky was clear. A massive white tent stood over an open grave, adorned with orchids flown in from 3 continents. Cameras waited at a distance, ready to document the farewell of one of the richest women in America. Eleanor Whitmore, billionaire philanthropist, tech pioneer, and quietly lonely soul, was being laid to rest. The priest cleared his throat. The pallbearers adjusted their grip on the coffin. The CEO of Whitmore Industries dabbed his eyes for the cameras. Everything was proceeding exactly as planned, until a voice cut through the silence like a crack of thunder. "Stop! She's not dead!" Every head turned. At the edge of the cemetery stood a man in a faded orange vest, boots smeared with dirt, hands gripping the handle of a battered garbage cart. His hair was gray, his shoulders stooped from decades of labor. He didn't belong among the silk suits and diamond brooches. He didn't belong at a billionaire's funeral. And yet he was running toward the coffin with terror in his eyes. "She's not dead!" he shouted again, louder now, his voice shaking. "I swear to you, she's alive!" Gasps rippled through the crowd. Security moved instantly, stepping in front of the man, arms outstretched. Someone laughed nervously. Someone else whispered, "Who let him in?" The Whitmore family lawyer scowled. "This is a private ceremony," he snapped. "Remove him." But the man refused to stop struggling. "Please," the garbage collector cried. "You don't understand. I've seen this before. I know what I'm talking about." The billionaire's son, Michael Whitmore, stepped forward, anger flashing across his face. "My mother was pronounced dead by 3 doctors, he said coldly. "This is cruel. Get him out of here." The man's eyes filled with tears. "She saved my life," he said hoarsely. "At least let me try to save hers." That sentence, simple, desperate, human, landed differently. The priest hesitated. The crowd murmured, and something flickered in Michael Whitmore's expression. Doubt. 5 minutes. Michael said finally, raising a hand. "You have 5 minutes. If you're wrong, you leave. Forever." Security reluctantly loosened their grip. The garbage collector stumbled toward the coffin, his hands trembling. He pressed his ear against the polished wood, ignoring the stares, the judgment, the humiliation. And then he froze. "There," he whispered. "Did you hear that?" No one heard anything, but he did. A faint sound, a whisper of breath. A fragile, almost forgotten rhythm. A heartbeat. "Open it," he begged. "Please, just open it." The lawyer protested. The CEO objected. The cameras leaned closer. Michael Whitmore stared at the coffin, at the finality of it, the terrible permanence, and nodded. "Open it." The lid creaked as it was lifted, and the world stopped. Eleanor Whitmore lay inside, pale and motionless, but her lips quivered. Then, impossibly, her chest rose. A scream tore through the crowd. Someone dropped to their knees. The priest crossed himself, whispering a prayer through tears. "She's breathing!" someone shouted. Chaos erupted. Paramedics were called. The funeral became a rescue. Eleanor Whitmore, declared dead less than 24 hours earlier, was rushed to the hospital as doctors fought to understand what had gone wrong. But one question echoed louder than all the rest. How did a garbage collector know what the world's best doctors had missed? The answer began 30 years earlier. Back then, Eleanor Whitmore wasn't a billionaire. She was just Eleanor, a young software engineer working 80-hour weeks, eating vending machine dinners, and trying to prove she belonged in a world that didn't expect women to build empires. One winter night, after another late shift, her car skidded on black ice and slammed into a guardrail. Airbags exploded. Darkness followed. When Eleanor woke, it wasn't in a hospital bed. It was in the back of a sanitation truck. She panicked, her body screaming in pain, her voice barely a whisper. She had been unconscious for hours, mistaken for dead in the wreck, her blood pressure dangerously low, her pulse faint. Everyone had given up. Everyone except the man who found her while doing his rounds. Samuel Brooks, a garbage collector with no medical degree, no authority, and no reason to stop, except his heart. He'd noticed something no one else had, warmth. She didn't feel like death, he would later say. Death is cold. She wasn't. Samuel had insisted on checking again. He'd felt patiently for a pulse, slow, weak, but there. He'd called for help, stayed with her, held her hand until the ambulance arrived. Eleanor survived, and she never forgot. Years later, when she became Eleanor Whitmore, billionaire, she quietly tracked Samuel down. Not to make headlines, not to feel heroic, but to say thank you. She paid off his debts, funded his children's education, made sure he never had to worry about medical bills again. And once a month, without fail, she met him for coffee at a small diner no one else noticed. They talked about life, about loss, about how invisible people carried the heaviest burdens. And Samuel learned something important during those conversations. Eleanor had a rare condition, a neurological disorder that could cause her body to enter a state so deep it mimicked death. Her doctors knew, but medicine wasn't perfect. Machines could fail. Humans could miss things. Samuel listened. Samuel remembered. So when he saw her face on the news, billionaire Eleanor Whitmore passes away at 58, his heart dropped. And when he attended the funeral from a distance, standing by his cart, something felt wrong. She didn't feel gone, he said later. It was the same feeling as before. This time the world listened. Eleanor Whitmore woke up 2 days later. The first thing she asked was one question. Did Samuel come? When she recovered enough to speak publicly, she told the story herself. Not from a stage, not at a gala, but from her hospital bed. Her voice steady, eyes shining. The man who saved me twice doesn't wear a suit, she said. He doesn't own stocks or buildings, but he has something far more valuable, the courage to care when no one else does. She paused, letting the world absorb that. I was nearly buried alive, she continued, not because people were careless, but because they were too busy, too confident, too disconnected to truly see me. Her recovery became international news. But what followed changed lives. Eleanor established a foundation focused on overlooked workers, sanitation crews, janitors, caregivers, delivery drivers, people society depends on but rarely thanks. She also made one decision that stunned Wall Street. She named Samuel Brooks to the board of her foundation. Reporters scoffed. Critics complained. What does a garbage collector know about leadership? They asked. Eleanor smiled. He knows how to notice what others ignore, she replied. And that's the most important skill of all. At the first board meeting, Samuel sat nervously at the polished table, his hands rough, his voice unsure. I don't belong here, he said. Eleanor reached across the table and held his hand. You always did, she said gently. The world just forgot to notice. Years later, when Eleanor finally did pass away, truly, peacefully, surrounded by loved ones, there was another funeral. But this one felt different. No cameras, no pretense, just people. Thousands of them. Garbage collectors stood beside CEOs, nurses beside investors, teachers beside janitors, all equal in grief. All united by gratitude. Samuel Brooks stood at the front, his orange vest folded neatly over his arm. She wasn't just a billionaire, he said, his voice trembling but strong. She was someone who saw people, all people. He looked out over the crowd. If you remember one thing from her life, he said, let it be this. Kindness doesn't need permission, and sometimes the person who saves the world is the one everyone else walks past. The crowd stood in silence, not because there was nothing to say, but because, for once, they truly understood, and somewhere in that quiet, hopeful stillness, Eleanor Whitmore's legacy lived on. Not in money or monuments, but in the simple, powerful truth that humanity, when seen and honored, can bring even the dead back to life.